Greetings, listeners, and welcome back to the EOE podcast. I'm your host, Nya Elyria, and I'm thrilled to have you join us for episode 2. For those of you just tuning in, or if episode 1 feels like a distant memory in the vast expanse of time, let's quickly recap our journey so far. In our inaugural episode, we dove deep into my vision for Earth's future over the next decade. We pondered humanity's incredible potential to shape its destiny and explored the exciting, yet sometimes daunting, challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. We touched upon themes of unity, planetary responsibility, and the urgent need for collective action. Building on that foundation, today we're tackling a question that's both timely and deeply personal for many, especially here in the United States. It's a question that sits at the intersection of environmentalism, social justice, and the very idea of home. Our central question for this episode is this: should environmental activists, social rights advocates, and justice fighters stay and fight, keep quiet, or leave the U.S.? Now, why are we asking this question, and why now? Well, let's be honest, the landscape here in the U.S. feels charged. We're seeing significant legislative pushbacks against environmental protections, alongside increasingly polarized societal views on, well, just about everything. Add to that the ever-present global pressures from climate change to geopolitical shifts, and it's clear we're at a critical juncture. This isn't just an academic debate. For those on the front lines of change, the activists, the advocates, the justice fighters, this question is about strategy, sustainability, and even personal well-being. It's about deciding where to focus energy, where to make the most impact, and how to navigate a complex and often frustrating system. Over the next hour, we'll be unpacking this multifaceted question, exploring different perspectives, and hopefully offering some clarity and perhaps even a little inspiration as we delve into the heart of this crucial conversation. Before we dive into the nuances of our central question, let's take a moment to ground ourselves in history. Understanding the legacy of activism, both here in the U.S. and around the world, can offer invaluable perspective as we consider the choices facing today's advocates. The United States has a rich, albeit complex, history of resistance and social change. Think back to the civil rights movement. Activists in the 1950s and 60s faced brutal oppression, yet they largely chose to stay and fight within the U.S. Their courageous persistence through sit-ins, marches, and countless acts of defiance ultimately dismantled legal segregation and transformed American society. The lessons here are profound. Staying and fighting, even in the face of immense adversity, can yield transformative change when coupled with unwavering commitment and strategic action. Consider, too, the anti-war movements, particularly during the Vietnam era. While many stayed and protested within the U.S., challenging government policies and shifting public opinion, others chose to leave the country, seeking refuge from conscription and expressing their dissent from abroad. This period highlights a different kind of survival strategy when staying and fighting carried unacceptable personal risks. Leaving became a form of resistance in itself, allowing individuals to continue their activism from a safer distance while undermining the legitimacy of the conflict. And let's not forget the ongoing struggle for environmental justice. From the fight against toxic waste in communities of color to indigenous, led movements protecting sacred lands, we see activists staying and fighting on the front lines, demanding accountability and systemic change where they live and work. These movements underscore the critical importance of place-based resistance, where leaving is simply not an option for those whose very homes and communities are under threat. But the American experience isn't the only one. Looking globally, we see diverse strategies employed by activists facing oppressive regimes. In apartheid-era South Africa, activists largely stayed and fought, building an internal resistance movement that, combined with international pressure, eventually dismantled the racist system. Conversely, in many authoritarian countries, activists have often been forced to leave to survive, forming diaspora communities that continue the struggle from exile, using international platforms to raise awareness and exert pressure on their home countries. These historical examples teach us that there's no single answer, no universally correct path. The choice to stay and fight, to keep quiet, or to leave is deeply contextual, shaped by the specific political, social, and personal realities faced by activists in different times and places. Understanding these historical struggles, both the victories and the sacrifices, provides a crucial backdrop as we grapple with the question before us today: what is the most effective path forward for activists in the current U.S. landscape? We'll delve deeper into the contemporary context now. Let's now consider our first option: stay and fight. For many, this is the most intuitive response, deeply rooted in the belief that change must be fought for from within. One of the primary benefits of staying and fighting is the potential to impact change directly from within the system. By remaining engaged on the ground, activists can directly challenge unjust laws and policies, participate in local and national elections, and hold elected officials accountable. This approach allows for sustained pressure and the opportunity to influence policy decisions at every level of government. Staying also allows for the crucial work of building community resilience and strong local networks. Change often happens from the ground up. By staying, activists can foster solidarity, organize their communities, and create mutual support systems that are essential for long-term movements. These local networks become the bedrock of resistance, providing resources, emotional support, and a sense of collective power. Furthermore, choosing to stay and fight can be about preserving a sense of ownership and continuity. For many, leaving feels like abandoning their homes, their communities, and their history. Staying is an affirmation of belonging, a refusal to be displaced or silenced. It's about maintaining the continuity of the struggle in the places where it matters most, ensuring that the fight for justice is not just a fleeting moment, but a sustained commitment across generations. However, the path of staying and fighting is fraught with challenges. Activists who choose this route often face significant political repression, legal hurdles, and even potential violence. We've seen examples of this throughout history and in contemporary movements, from arrests and surveillance to intimidation and physical harm. Navigating this landscape requires immense courage, strategic planning, and a deep understanding of the risks involved. Another significant challenge is burnout and resource depletion. Sustained activism in the face of opposition can be emotionally and physically draining. The constant struggle, coupled with limited resources and the slow pace of change, can lead to exhaustion and disillusionment. Maintaining momentum and taking care of oneself and one's community becomes paramount to avoid burnout and ensure the longevity of the movement. Despite these challenges, the stay and fight option remains a powerful and vital strategy for activists committed to transforming the U.S. from within. It's a path that demands resilience, courage, and a long-term vision, but one that holds the potential for deep and lasting change. Next, we'll explore the option of keeping quiet and examine what that might entail. Now, let's turn to a more controversial and perhaps less immediately appealing option: keep quiet. It's important to explore this option with nuance, recognizing that it's not necessarily about abandoning one's values, but rather a strategic choice with its own set of potential benefits and significant drawbacks. One of the primary benefits of keeping quiet, particularly in volatile times, is ensuring personal safety. When facing political repression or social unrest, speaking out can carry significant risks. Choosing to remain silent can be a way to protect oneself and one's loved ones from potential harm, whether it's legal repercussions, social ostracization, or even physical danger. This is a very real and valid concern, especially for activists from marginalized communities who are already disproportionately vulnerable. Another potential benefit is avoiding direct conflict and potential legal repercussions. Activism, by its nature, often involves challenging established power structures, which can lead to confrontations with authorities and the legal system. Keeping quiet can be a way to avoid these direct clashes, allowing individuals to perhaps operate under the radar, preserve resources, and strategically choose their battles for a later time when the environment may be less hostile. However, the challenges of keeping quiet are considerable and ethically weighty. The most significant is the risk of complicity by silence. When injustice is rampant, choosing silence can be interpreted as tacit acceptance or even support of the status quo. This silence can embolden oppressive forces and undermine the very values that activists hold dear. It can also lead to a sense of moral compromise and internal conflict for those who feel compelled to speak out but choose not to. Furthermore, widespread silence can lead to the potential erosion of collective power and influence. Social movements rely on collective voice and action to create change. If too many individuals choose to keep quiet, the movement as a whole can lose momentum, visibility, and ultimately, its ability to effect change. Silence can be isolating and demobilizing, weakening the very networks and communities that are essential for resistance. It's crucial to understand that keeping quiet is not a monolithic concept. It can range from strategic silence in certain areas to complete withdrawal from public discourse. And while it may offer certain short-term benefits, particularly in terms of personal safety, the long-term challenges, especially the risk of complicity and the erosion of collective power, are substantial and must be carefully weighed. Finally, we will examine the third option, leaving the U.S. Finally, let's consider the third and perhaps most radical option, leave. For some activists, particularly those facing extreme threats or disillusionment, leaving the U.S. might seem like the most viable or even necessary path forward. One of the most compelling benefits of leaving is the possibility of finding refuge in more stable or supportive environments. If the U.S. is perceived as becoming increasingly hostile or ineffective for activism, relocating to a country with stronger environmental protections, more robust social safety nets, or a more open political climate can offer a sense of safety and renewed hope. This can be particularly attractive for activists who are experiencing burnout or facing direct threats in the U.S. Leaving can also open doors to joining international movements and broadening the activist network. Many global challenges like climate change and human rights require international cooperation. Relocating can facilitate connections with activists and organizations around the world, fostering cross-border collaborations and amplifying the global impact of one's work. This can lead to new strategies, resources, and a sense of solidarity that transcends national borders. However, the challenges of leaving are also significant, both for the individual activist and for the movements they leave behind. One major challenge is the loss of local influence and a disconnect from community struggles. Activism is often deeply rooted in local contexts and communities. Leaving can mean losing touch with those networks, diminishing one's ability to directly impact local issues, and potentially feeling a sense of detachment from the very communities one is fighting for. Another concern is the potential for brain drain and fragmented activist efforts. If a significant number of activists choose to leave the U.S., it could lead to a loss of valuable talent, experience, and energy within the country. This exodus could weaken domestic movements and make it more difficult to address pressing issues within the U.S. context. Furthermore, activist efforts could become fragmented, with energy dispersed across different locations and potentially less coordinated in addressing the challenges within the U.S. Choosing to leave is a complex decision with profound personal and political implications. While it may offer refuge and new opportunities for some, it also carries the risk of weakening domestic movements and losing connection with the communities and struggles within the U.S. Now, before we move on, let's take a moment to understand more about Project Elyria, which is central to our podcast. A video on this channel explains how to start your own local chapter of Project Elyria, which is described as a decentralized movement focused on community-level resistance. Essentially, the video is a step-by-step guide to creating a local Project Elyria cell. It emphasizes decentralized organization, digital activism, community engagement, and financial resilience. To start a cell, you need a minimum of 3 members. Key roles include a social media/outreach coordinator for online presence and content creation, an XRP steward to handle finances using XRP cryptocurrency and protest NFT, and a membership coordinator for community building and communication. Cell management involves chat moderation, event planning workshops, cleanups, protests, impactful and safe protests, collaboration with local groups, and financial management by the XRP steward. For success, the video highlights security using encrypted platforms, documentation for transparency, conflict resolution processes, and global connection with other Project Elyria cells. In our next segment, we will synthesize these 3 options and discuss the factors that might influence an activist's decision. In this segment, let's bring together the threads of our conversation and offer some thoughts. We've explored 3 distinct options: stay and fight, keep quiet and leave. We've examined the historical context of activism, the potential benefits and challenges of each path, and we've considered diverse perspectives from activists and global movements. It's clear there is no single, easy answer to the question of whether environmental activists, social rights advocates, and justice fighters should stay and fight, keep quiet, or leave the U.S. The most effective path is deeply personal and highly contextual, depending on individual circumstances, priorities, and risk tolerance, as well as the specific nature of the issues being addressed and the political landscape in which one is operating. For those deeply rooted in their communities, for whom leaving feels like abandoning their homes and those they serve, staying and fighting remains a powerful and essential strategy. It's about building local resilience, fostering solidarity, and directly confronting injustice on the ground. This path demands immense courage and perseverance, but it holds the potential for transformative change from within. For those facing immediate threats or seeking to prioritize personal safety, keeping quiet may, in certain limited contexts, be a temporary strategy for self-preservation. However, it's crucial to recognize the ethical risks of complicity and the potential erosion of collective power that silence can entail. If choosing this path, it should be a strategic pause, not a permanent retreat, and always considered in light of the potential impact on the larger movement. For those feeling disillusioned, burned out, or seeking new avenues for impact, leaving the U.S. may offer a path to finding refuge, building international networks, and broadening the scope of their activism. While it carries the risk of disconnecting from local struggles, it can also open doors to global collaboration and new forms of resistance. This option should be considered with careful thought about how to maintain connection and contribute back to the movements within the U.S. even from a distance. Ultimately, the most effective approach may not be choosing just one of these options in isolation, but rather finding ways to integrate elements of each. Perhaps it's about staying and fighting locally while building global networks of solidarity. Perhaps it's about strategically choosing when to speak out and when to operate more quietly, adapting to the evolving political climate. Perhaps it's about some activists choosing to relocate to build power elsewhere while maintaining strong ties to and supporting those who remain on the ground. These questions feel particularly relevant in this moment. We are in a moment of significant challenge, but also of immense potential. The choices we make now as activists and as a society will shape the future for decades to come. My hope is that this segment has provided some food for thought, some historical perspective, and perhaps a renewed sense of purpose as you navigate these complex choices. Thank you for joining us for this segment of the EOE podcast. We will continue this crucial conversation in the next segment. Please stay engaged, stay connected, and keep fighting for the future you believe in, wherever you may be. In this segment, we're going to shift our focus from the present and the past to the future. Let's consider predictions and future scenarios. What might the next decade hold for activists in the U.S.? And how might they adapt to the evolving landscape? Looking ahead, it's difficult to say definitively whether we will see a consolidation of activist networks within the U.S. or a significant exodus. It's likely we'll see elements of both. On one hand, the challenges we've discussed, environmental crises, social injustices, political polarization, are likely to intensify, creating even greater urgency for collective action within the U.S. This could drive a deeper consolidation of activist networks as groups realize the necessity of working together, sharing resources, and building broader coalitions to maximize their impact domestically. However, we also cannot ignore the very real possibility of a continued, or even accelerated, exodus of activists. If political repression increases, if legislative avenues for change become further restricted, and if the overall environment for activism becomes increasingly hostile, some individuals and groups may understandably choose to relocate to more supportive environments, either within or outside the U.S. This could particularly be the case for activists from marginalized communities who face heightened risks. Predicting shifts in governmental policies and public sentiment is also complex. We might see further legislative pushbacks against environmental and social justice initiatives, potentially leading to increased frustration and a sense of urgency among activists. However, we could also see shifts in public sentiment, particularly as the impacts of climate change and social inequality become more undeniable. Public opinion can be volatile, and moments of crisis can sometimes create openings for significant policy changes. Activist strategies will need to be nimble and adaptable, responding to both potential setbacks and unexpected opportunities. In terms of strategies for adaptation, I believe we will see a surge of innovative approaches. Digital organizing will become even more crucial, allowing activists to connect, mobilize, and share information across geographical boundaries, circumventing some of the limitations of physical location. We may see the rise of hybrid models of activism, combining local, on-the-ground action with international advocacy and digital campaigns, creating multifaceted strategies that leverage different strengths and reach wider audiences. And I anticipate a growing emphasis on community self-reliance, as activists focus on building resilient local communities that can withstand external pressures and create alternative systems of support and sustainability. Ultimately, I believe we are moving towards new forms of activism that transcend geographical borders. The challenges we face are increasingly global, and the solutions will require global collaboration. Activist networks are likely to become more decentralized, more digitally connected, and more transnational, operating across borders and leveraging diverse strategies to create change on a planetary scale. The focus may shift from primarily national level political change to building global solidarity and fostering systemic shifts that address the root causes of environmental and social crises, regardless of national boundaries. In our next segment, we will delve into actionable steps and resources for those grappling with these choices.